Does it work? Yeah, it works. Good morning, everybody. Can you find a seat? And then we can start.
Yeah, it's clear.
So, good morning in Bologna for the 4th Healthy Livestock Consortium meeting, 3-day meeting, where hopefully we're going to learn a lot and at last see each other again, because that's been a while, and it's good that you're all here. Well, not all here, unfortunately. We will have several people online as well today, tomorrow even more, and a few hopefully during the General Assembly on Friday. But you're here, And that's good to see. Before I start, I have to make an official announcement, which is that the whole meeting is being recorded because we would like to put it on our website, probably in chunks for different presentations and that, so that it's well accessible. But just so that you know, you still have the option to leave if you do not want to be recorded, but I hope you stay. But everything that you will say and that I will say will be recorded for posterity. If that's okay with you. And people online who have joined us, of course, they're also welcome not to come if they don't like that. But I hope you all stay. I have a button and I can press the first slide with a bit of luck. Now it says next, but it doesn't do next. Yeah, there we are. Bologna. 22nd to 24th of June. We've spent some time preparing and want to make you a very warm welcome in Bologna because here in the room it's okay. Outside it will be 33 degrees and that's less than it was in the last few days and also less than what it will be tomorrow because tomorrow it will be 37 again, I heard. We'll keep our heads cool here, I hope, but we have to go outside as well and then it will be a little bit warm. Welcome to everybody, also the people online. And as I said, it's good to see you. These are our previous editions, and you might recognize the group pictures that we took then. We had a fantastic kickoff meeting in China, in Beijing in 2018. We had a very good meeting also together with the EAP in Ghent in 2019. And then, of course, COVID struck and we weren't able to meet in person, but at least we had our online meeting in March of 21. Welcome also to our Chinese guests who have joined us online. I don't know how many, but I'm sure later on I'll hear a number, how many will be there. And a special welcome to 2 members of our advisory board who have come to join us again for 2 days and share their wisdom with us. Ted is sitting over there in the corner, all the way from Australia, Professor Ted Witham, and Professor Jörg Hartung is sitting there in the middle of the table from Hanover in Germany. Thanks for being here. And that's the thanks or the welcome from my side. And then I hope that Professor Yang Shuming in China has followed the proceedings and maybe he can say a few words now. Yang Shuming, are you there?
Okay, so thanks. So I want on behalf of the consortium meeting, I want to say good morning or good afternoon to the European partner or Chinese partner. So I think this is a very joyful to meet together again to report research proceedings, share experience, and discussing the result in order to complete our project, which will end in the early next year. It has been more than 2 years, since the novel, coronavirus outbroke and became a worldwide epidemic. It brings much negative influence on carrying out the project. This is international, collaboration research. It needs travel, much more travel, but the virus, especially Omicron, set a great barrier to our meet. The virus is still now raging, but we come. So thanks for your active attending, and thanks for effort, our core consortium team and the Spring group and the logo team. The global infector and responsible for the corona pandemic, a human health crisis caused by virus passed from the animal, highlight the need for coordinated action across the sector to prevent humans and human health and prevent disruption to the food system. It highlights the significance of One Health in work on food security, sustainable agricultural food safety, antibiotics resistance, nutrient animal and health or something. Issues on One Health approach is essential for the process to anticipate, prevent, detecting, and control disease that spread between animal and human. Take antibiotics resistant, ensure food safety. So our project strategy of biosecurity, animal resilience, early detection, and precision medication to tackle abuse of antibiotics animal production is in line of the One Health.
Then he has a poor connection.
As a worldwide umbrella approach to better antibiotic resistance, that is a collaboration effort of the mighty stakeholders and attain optimal health for humans, domestic animals, and environments. So that pork and broiler produce play a very important role in the shared effort to use antibiotics responsibly to help minimize the potential antibiotics for the animal and human health. In end, that's a comprehension and inclusive approach where created the double win by protecting human and animal health. I remember that Hans had said on the kickoff meeting in Beijing 2018, we think our project is good. European Union, European Commission think it is good. Chinese most think it's good, so it was approved. But now, through 4 years of working, it's time to see our project is real good by outcomes which we obtain, impact which we imposed, good pilot case which we demonstrated. So we hope we have a successful meeting. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yang Shuming, for this welcome and for this introduction. And of course, you point out exactly what we're here about for the coming few days, which is to make that next step into translating or informing the stakeholders that are looking at our project about the progress that we've made. And therefore, although today it's a consortium meeting, tomorrow we'll be joined by a lot more people from the industry, about 25 extra people from the industry here, and hopefully over 100 online. So thanks, Yang Shuming, for the introduction and the welcome. And I'll move on to the rest of my slides just to take you through some organizational issues. First of all, even before I start, I want to say thank you very much to the people in this team who have helped organize the meeting here in Bologna. It's not easy to do it from Wageningen when it's in another country, as you can imagine. So Paolo, Kees, Bas Kemp, Jan Vaart and Jaël, and of course Brigitte, our new project office manager that you all met via email, but maybe not in person. Well, there she is. Thanks very much to you already for helping in organizing this. Joost van den Borne is the research manager of the Schippers Group. And the Schippers Group is a company in the Netherlands. And together with the Schippers Group, tomorrow we are organizing the Industry Day. So you won't see Joost yet because this is a consortium meeting. Tomorrow you will see him. And this is a very distinguished group, I might say, or at least some members in the group are very distinguished. In fact, over the last 2 weeks, we've had one extra doctor in this team. So Paolo received his doctorate only 2 weeks ago from Florence University, and this is the alma mater building where you received your award. So congratulations, Paolo, for that. And I shouldn't leave unmentioned that we now have an officer in the Order of Orange Nassau, officially designated by the King of the Netherlands, which is Jan Vaarten, who is sitting over there, for all his work that he did for veterinary sciences and also antimicrobial work in the Netherlands and abroad. So Jan, congratulations on the medal. Jan got it awarded only, what, 3 or 4 days ago in London on Saturday night. So well done. Nice to be working with such a team. Antimicrobial resistance, our project stems from the action plan that the EU put up in 2017. Professor Yang Shuming already highlighted from the Chinese point of view, and it's very similar. The developments in Europe are very similar, maybe at a different pace, but they are in by and large, we are aiming for the same thing. 2017 seems a long time ago, but a lot has happened also in European politics regarding antimicrobials and antimicrobial resistance fighting. So we've had a new commissioner, Stella Kyriakides, who has also committed herself to the fight against AMR. We have had new legislation adopted in 2020 that's now starting in 2022. It forbids the routine prophylactic use of antimicrobials. It stops or reduces the metaphylactic use of antimicrobials, which means that if you do have an incidence of a disease on the farm and you want to protect all the animals, you're still, if it's very serious, allowed to use it. But there is generally more and more a clampdown, and that is a good thing, of course, on the use of antimicrobials there where it is not absolutely necessary to use it. And science is needed. Only last year in September, Parliament also had a look at a proposal from the Green Party in Europe that wanted to ban all the critical antimicrobials for livestock. And if you think about that, it means that certain diseases that pigs, poultry, other species can have can then not be treated anymore by veterinarians. Now, fortunately, it was not adopted. And what helps is that science helps to inform policymakers on how these things work, what the science is behind it, and how they should take the decisions. It was turned down by an overwhelming majority, thankfully, and I'm sure many of you voted the petition at the time that went round, and in this case that's been a success then. But we have to be aware, and we have to also be aware of our responsibility in providing our own policymakers and the European ones with good science, good evidence. Yeah, you may, Jörg, if it's brief.
Just to add on that, yes. 4 weeks ago in Berlin, there was founded and opened a research center for antimicrobial resistance in veterinary medicine. It was planned for 26 million, but then cost at the end 62 million. But nevertheless, it's brand new. Just for your information, there will be cooperation, I think.
Okay, so Jörg Hartung was saying that in Germany, a new center on antimicrobial resistance has been officially designated by the European Union.
No, that's a
federal German center. Yeah, okay, thanks very much. Yeah, let's see if we can extend our contacts with them. But I'm looking at Jan then as well and our communications team, but we can work on that. This is the picture that you all saw in our proposal already quite a few years ago. What we've done since the start is that we looked at different innovations. We looked at health and welfare plans in Work Package 1. And then we brought it all together in Work Package 5, where they are being validated. So where we look at the innovations and say, what do they do on an economic sense? Are they effective? How does society respond to them? And then in the final work package of the project, we come to the dissemination. And this is the end of the project, although much of it is running in parallel, of course, where we disseminate our findings. And we're actually at this point here at the moment. What we're going to do in the coming days is to collect what we have, to have a think about what that means for our end products, and then to support the communications team, but also support yourself in communicating about the findings. And we'll do that according to the program that was sent to you. By today is the consortium meeting day. We look at the different work packages. We will hear the presentations from the work package leaders. In the afternoon, we have a scholarship winner, and I will introduce Katarina later today, but we have the winner of our Technology Transfer Unit Scholarship who does her presentation. And then after that, we will focus for the rest of the afternoon on work package 6 and look at the main products of our project. The standards, the business-to-business standards, policy documents, technical notes, and the app that we are developing as part of the project. Then tomorrow, as I said, we should be joined by twice as many people, or by the same number of people that we have now, so we should double in size, and also have a lot of attendance from the via internet. Tomorrow is organized together with Schippers Bladel, and we will start with a keynote from the CVO, the Chief Veterinary Officer of FAO. And after that, we will pitch shortly, very briefly, our main outcomes to the industry. And we have several interested people from the industry, from other academia, who also want to make a short pitch on each of the strategies that we're developing in healthy livestock. There will be posters. There will be a round table in the afternoon with a few distinguished guests, shall we say, who get asked or interrogated, I was almost going to say, by Jan about a number of issues related to antimicrobial use. And then we go into a second round of separate sessions, just like we do today, but then it's more about themes that we want to address, the themes that came out of a January meeting with Schippers Bladel. Tell you more about that tomorrow. There's going to be an aperitif and food, and I thought it would just be a snack, but when I saw the list of what we're going to eat tomorrow afternoon, you don't need to go out after that to a restaurant. So hopefully it's going to be a very nice finish of a very nice day tomorrow. And then the final day will be our General Assembly, where I would like to discuss a few things, present and discuss a few organizational management issues. For that meeting, only one representative from each partner in our consortium is required, but you're all very welcome. So please join us if you want. That's the overview of what we're going to do. I want to say again that I hope you're going to enjoy our meeting very much. And I think I can then hand over to the first speaker, which should be Paolo. We're going to start a round now of the 4 work packages, and Paolo, of course, work package 1, so you'll kickstart. Maybe before I do, should I just give a brief moment if anybody has any questions at this stage after the introduction? No, we're all fine. Okay. Give the word to you.
Thank you, Hans. And thank you everybody for being here. And now I would like to present the main outcomes from the European team in work package 1. So this presentation is a collection of the inputs from the different teams. So the team, my team, together with Annalisa, she is not here, but she will be here tomorrow, from Janneke Schrader and her colleagues of Wageningen University and Research, Catherine Fouchon, Pierre de Belloise, Catherine Belloc, Emily Leblanc-Maridor from INRA, and Sotiris and George Kefalas, Kyriakos and Maro from VTN, Greece and Cyprus. The objective of work package 1 was to reduce the risk of pathogen introduction, exposure and spread on modern intensive broiler and pig farms in China and Europe through the development and application of tailor-made health biosecurity protocols and health plans. And to do this, we developed 2 biosecurity risk analysis tools and protocols for broiler and pig farms to assess systematically disease risks related to housing management, to define farm tailor-made health plans, including biosecurity protocols, which are a list of biomarkers to monitor the risk mitigation. The 2 biosecurity risk analysis tools were developed according to 2 conceptual approaches. The first one was the BioCheck UGent. You probably know it. It deals with the external biosecurity and internal biosecurity. in a farm. And the second is the FEO 3-zone biosecurity model, dealing with the 3-zone, not internal external, but we have a red zone, which is the public zone outside the farm, the professional zone, which is the zone, the orange one, as you can see here, which is the area in which staff, workers, vehicles, equipment are moved between the buildings and the animal houses. And the green zone is the animal houses. But also we have two other zones, which are the interfaces, the transitional zones between the red and the orange, and between the orange and the green zone. And for each of these zones, a number of questions were posed to the farmer and to his vet, and they had to reply and to score each of them according to the risk. The higher the score, the higher is the biosecurity on that farm. Biomarkers were selected. One was the main one for broiler farm, where the food pathogen score, which is a knowledge very important for the welfare of broilers, for the health, for the quality of the litter, for the quality of the air and of the environment in which the chicken are kept. And for pig farms, a number of biomarkers, among these the respiratory disease scores, done on a sample, representative sample of animals, of pigs, of 4 categories: sows, piglets, weaners, and fatteners. Feces scores, the same, and whenever the respiratory scores and feces scores were over certain thresholds, samples of blood and serum for analysis of PRRS, or samples of feces for laboratory analysis of E. coli were taken to focus and to check for these respiratory or enteric diseases. Skin and plaque lesion at slaughter were assessed on a representative sample of carcasses in Italian farms and not in French farms, because assessors were not allowed during the COVID emergency to assess slaughterhouses. Haptoglobin was analyzed in samples of serum blood samples or in weaners. Cortisol and dihydroepiandrosterone, 2 stress hormones, were analyzed in pig hair collected from the farms. Bacterial load in pen surfaces after cleaning and disinfection was analyzed also, and also mortality rates for all pig categories. Farms were visited 3 times. The first time to do the biosecurity analysis and to draw up the health plan according to the farmers and the vets. And the second and third time, the visits were aimed at detecting the changes in health, welfare, and productivity in the selected biomarkers, in biosecurity practices and health risk management, in antimicrobial usage. Also, farmers' opinion and vets' opinion were collected about the efficacy of the health and welfare plan in visit 1 and at the end in visit 3. Economic data were provided for work package 5, and also samples of meat, drinking water, and manure were collected for the detection of antibiotic residues, which will be analyzed in work package 5. And here are you can see here the scoring, the BEAT scoring. So we named the biosecurity analysis tool BEAT. So the BEAT scorings for the 5 zones. So the red one, the external, the interface between the red and the orange one, and the interface between orange and the green one. And we can see the scoring from the French and Italian farms. What we can see here is that more room for improvement we can find was shown for the 2 transitional zone and the orange. You can see also low scoring for the red one, but the problem is that in the public area there is no possibility for the farmer to intervene because they are public area only for parking and nothing more. So more room improvement was for these zones. In this figure, you can see the number of formulated recommendation in tailor-made health plans. You can see the brown line are those recommendations given to the farms. On your left, you can see the French farms. On your right, the Italian farms. So many more recommendations were provided to Italian farms because we use two different approaches. And you will see that different farms, in French farms, we had closed cycle farms, whereas in Italy, we had weaning farms, sow farms, and many fattening farms. So, but in green, you can see those recommendations, the number of recommendations which were implemented, and the blue lines are those recommendations which were planned to be implemented in the future, not in the monitoring time during the project. Major improvements, we can see here, you can see this figure, we can see double lines because we can see the scoring in visit 1 and visit 3 at the end of the monitoring period. And we can see that the major improvements were for French farms in the transitional zone between the red and the orange zone, more 5.4%. And the Italian farm, more improvement was achieved in the orange zone. Let's see the main improvements done. So not much in the red zone, as I told you, because there was a limited power of farmers to intervene. So main intervention were related to the parking places for staff and visitors outside the farm. For the transitional zone from red to orange, main recommendation regarded the hygiene lock and the associated practices, overall boots, clear distinction between dirty and clean zone. And also fencing around the farm was another intervention. And this was done mainly in France because of the recent French regulation regarding the spread of African swine fever. So those farms were obliged to do that, or not only recommended by the BIT. Whereas in Italian farms, most recommendations implemented were about the rodent control, cleaning and disinfection of surfaces, and carcass removal, which is very important. In the transitional zone between orange and the green zone, most recommendations were about overalls and boots at disposal of the staff and of the visitors and vets. In the green zone, main recommendation regarded the management of sick animals or the management of the feed storage. Antimicrobial use was calculated for most of these farms in terms of the DDVET, according to European Medicine Agency methodology for the European surveillance veterinary antimicrobial consumption. And you can see here in this figure the antimicrobial use for sow, piglets, weaners, and finishers in French farms in blue and Italian farms in green. And we can see here that the main use in France of antimicrobials was for piglets and weaners, with respectively low increasing and decreasing. And in Italy, the main use was for weaners, with a decreasing for weaners and finishers. Just to remind you that those farms, so the 20 French farms and the 20 Italian farms, were not representative of the farm in their country, but because, and they were shaped differently. So one were in France, they were close cycle farms, and in Italian they were, sow or weaners or fattening farms. Let's move to the outcome from broiler farms. We can see in these figures the average scores for the red-orange transitional zone, the orange zone, the professional one, the orange-green, and the green zone. And we can see that in broiler farms were 13 in Netherlands, 7 in Cyprus, and 10 in Greece. We can see here a lower value for the orange zone for the Greek farms, and lower scores for Cypriot farms in relation to the orange-green transitional zone and the green zone. So there are some changes, some different scoring among these farms groups. In this figure, I would like to show you the number of interventions which were recommended and implemented in brackets, you can see as percentages. And this table shows that most of the intervention implemented were low cost and short-term interventions, or medium cost short-time intervention, or low cost and medium term interventions. So as said before, some interventions were planned in the future because the farmers were not available to do that quickly. As regards food pathogens, we can see in the 3 groups, the A is Netherlands, B Cyprus, and C is Greece. You can see that the different scoring in 4 consecutive production cycles. So in each farm, 4 production cycles were considered. And we can see that the values, the scoring for in the Dutch farms were low and pretty constant. Whereas in the Cypriot and Greek farms, we can see a decrease along the 4 production cycles. There was also an effect, a seasonal effect, but we can see a decrease. In this table, I would like to show you the number of farms with the antimicrobial use and days of treatment. And what we can see here is that in Cypriot farms, the consumption was higher in terms of days of treatment. And if we compare the first cycle with the last cycle, we can see a reduction in the number of farms using antimicrobials and a reduction in terms of day of treatment. So the main conclusion that we can draw from our study is that the biosecurity analysis tool was found effective to identify biosecurity strengths and weaknesses of pig and broiler farms. Assessment with BEAT was a good starting point for the making of tailor-made health plans for each farm, in agreement with farmers and their vets responsible for herd health, including targets that could be checked and updated in the medium and long term as an ongoing process. So it is a dynamic process instead of a static process. So it deals, and also it is important to discuss these topics together with the farm and also the vet. Although antimicrobial use cannot be only linked to the biosecurity, a reduction in antimicrobial use is reported for broiler and pig farms with higher use of such antimicrobials. However, it would be interesting to see the longer term effects in the future of such health plans. Thank you very much for your attention. This was a summary, of course, of the outputs, but more outputs will be included in the scientific paper that we are going to publish, to submit and publish afterwards.
Shall we? No? maybe answer some questions. Are there any questions? Sorry, are there any questions from the audience? Any of our colleagues? Ilias, please.
Paolo, I have two questions, Josh.
Yes, please.
The first one is that you used the Ghent, the biosecurity protocol. Did you produce results with the Ghent protocol, or you didn't use that at all?
No, we
You
didn't
didn't.
use it.
You
at
used
all.
the FAO.
You use as a basis. So we considered some questions, some, yeah, it was,
Okay.
the system was inspired to some extent to the BioCheck Ghent.
Thank you. And the second question is that your results from the pigs look very impressive. Why did you focus only on one parameter in the chickens, the foot pad dermatitis?
Yeah, this is a question that I was involved in the pig part more than in the broader part. But as you know, the another one was considered, but then it was not, Campylobacter was also considered, but at the end was not considered as relevant for that. But as you know, probably the foot pad lesion score is in the Directive 43/2007, and it is the main parameter. It is a sort of iceberg indicator of the health, welfare, and also the quality of the management. And so it was decided that that was the main one.
Okay, thanks, Ilias. Thanks, Paolo. Anybody else? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Paolo. You said that in France, effectively, we had some measures of biosecurity that became compulsory during the project. Was it the same in Italy?
Not exactly. No. At the moment, due to the African swine fever that we had in wild boars, a number of measures had been taken in the places, in the regions, in the area, and the surroundings of that area. And it is mainly with free-range farms or domestic farms, and they had to close the pigs inside or to slaughter them. But I think we are going to have an evolution in that. But there was in the 80s, at the time of the foot and mouth disease, there was in this region a regional law which, according to this, the perimeter fencing was mandatory. But then people forgot, and now, but they are doing again. So they are restoring and they are fencing due to that, because pig farmers are very much concerned about it.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Jan?
Thank you, Paolo, for the presentation. If I understood it correctly, you say that most of the interventions are short-term and low-cost interventions and less longer-term and higher-cost interventions. But that has more to do with the financial possibilities of the farmers, because I think the tool can be used for both ways in daily practice, if you want to change something now, or also for long-term, if you are going to change your farm, for example.
Yeah, it depends on the financial reasons, but also to the type of farmers. Because in closed cycle farms, you know, biosecurity is very much important, as well as the sow farms. Whereas in fattening farms, the biosecurity is important, but not so much, because, you know, they are empty, and then some of them do all in, all out system, which is pretty good. So different need and different investment availability.
Thanks, Jan and Paolo. Roos?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I also had a question about those interventions, because where were they based on? Was it already before the project, or was it really targeted for the specific farms?
Yeah, all the intervention came out from the biosecurity analysis. So at first, a number of questions for each zone was posed to the farmer and the vet in presence. So they discussed about they did the score. They did also according to the weight given, according to the need, the perception. And so the role of a vet is very important because they are responsible for the health of the herd. And according to that, we also asked, we provided them some recommendations how to improve if the score was low. So we provided them with some recommendations. So, and the number of recommendations depending on the on the scoring, of course, and the type of farm, because the idea of tailor-made health plans was about the need to consider each farm as a different story. So the big difference between the biocheck event is the biocheck event is a more, you can say, static. So you have a you reply, you fill in a checklist, and for biosecurity and internal or external. But in the BEAT system, there is it is an ongoing process. It's a dynamic process in which you agree about the scoring, but also a target in terms of intervention, in terms of time, and then you go back again in a farm. And also the French team did this 3 focus groups recently with the farmers involved. And they said that they were also pleased to be acknowledged about also biomarkers. So calf score, or for instance, they were not aware very much about some respiratory problems when they do not compare themselves with others. So it's a way of communication, it's a system to improve communication and discussion, and in order to look into the future and to agree about targets, goals to be achieved.
Thanks. Thank you, Paolo. Thank you, Rose. Brigitte, are there any questions on? No? Anything else from the audience over here? Okay. Can we connect with Yang Xuming?
Okay. So may I have questions? Thank you for your presentation. So you use the BEAT this system to identify the the biotic security for the different farmer. Then they get a different farmer get a different score of based on this system. So my question is that do you recommend different mention to different of the farmer with different score? I mean, you get some recommendation to reduce or increase the BATA score for the farmer. I mean, what about the next measure will be taken?
Sorry, what about the measure? So we measure the health status of the animals according to biomarkers. So biomarkers were thought as a way to measure the health of the animals and to monitor them in the second and the third visits.
Yeah. Okay, I get it. You get the biomarker to assistance of the farmers. Then you get a BATA score for the farmer to identify the biosecurity of each farmer. Okay, yeah. So then I mean, what about the next? When the score, the biomarker is high or is low? Or do you take recommended some of the measures to deal with this?
So do you base your recommendations jointly with the farmer on the outcomes of the beet assessment? That's how
yes. We collected opinions at the end. In the third visit, we collected opinions of farmers and vets about the efficacy of the beet and the efficacy of the recommendation.
But also prior, Paolo, so also before you discussed with them what their changes were going to be during the observation period, the testing period, did you take into account the differences that you scored before on the baseline?
Yeah. So we have the comparison between the situation in the first visit before intervention and the third visit after intervention. And so we have different beet scores, and also we have different measures of the biomarkers in order to have a comparison and also to check for the efficacy, because our purpose as in deliverable 1.2 is to analyze the effectiveness of this system to improve biosecurity in order to reduce antimicrobial use, although antimicrobial use is not only linked to biosecurity, but also to the procedures done by the vets, the prescriptions of antimicrobials, and so on. It's a matter of skills and professionality, and that's it.
Does that help, Yang Shuming?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for your interpretation. So okay. So thank you, Paolo. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. So thank you for your answer. Okay.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you, Shuming.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I think we should move to the next work package. Thanks very much, Paolo. Before we ask Bas to come, people make mistakes. I make mistake as well. It's always risky when you have a whole list of names of people that you thank at the beginning. I got the list because I thought I will not miss anybody in this very important group. I got it from an email conversation that we had within the team. I apologize. So I just want to correct a mistake that I made. I forgot a very important person that was the main contact between us and the organizer on the hotel here, which is Andrea Porciolucci, and he's in the room somewhere, although I can't see him. I already thanked you in person, Andrea, but I forgot your name on the list. But I want to correct that now. So thanks a lot for helping us. Bas? Oh, I wasn't sure whether there was a. Okay, no. Yeah, more than a second maybe. Okay, sorry, I didn't know that. So good. Who will be presenting?
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Apologies.
Okay,
Apologies for the mistake. Please go ahead.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to attend this meeting. And now I would like to present our work package 1's progress and related outcomes. The topic is about biosecurity and bioprevention and control techniques in intensive pig and broiler farms. My presentation will cover these three parts. First, I introduce the objectives briefly. The objectives of our work package 1 include three aspects. They are about the biosecurity plan and the biomarkers of pig and broiler farms. and the application of biosecurity plan in intensive pig and broiler farms. Our tasks include 3 aspects. The first task is to research main biosecurity risk factors in intensive pig and broiler farms and develop the online assessment system and apps. The second one is to research and develop biosecurity biomarkers and equipment. Then the last one is to research biosecurity standards for intensive farms and formulate biosecurity plans. Then moving on to the progress, according to the plan, by now the main work we have done can be summarized as 3 parts. The first part is the establishment of 2 risk assessment models and development of online risk assessment system for pig and broiler farms. The second part is the establishment of 5 biomarkers for farm and the development of 4 rapid detection kits and methods. The last part of work is the development of biosecurity plan for pig and poultry farms. Next, I will present the main recent progress and the most interesting outcomes. First progress is about the risk factor assessment model and the index systems for intensive pig and broiler farms in China. In order to reduce the risk of animal disease, such as the African swine fever in pig farms and the avian influenza in broiler farms, we determined the main risk factors of the pig and broiler farms and designed assessment questionnaires to establish the risk factor assessment model and the index system. For the pig farms, the risk factor assessment questionnaire contains a total of 98 indexes from 9 aspects, which including the setting selection, environmental biosecurity, personnel management, disinfection channel, supplies disinfection, vehicle management, disease prevention and control, and pigs management and warehouse management. We use the Delphi method to give the indexes of the 9 aspects different weights. By calculating the total score, the assessment results are divided into 3 risk levels, the high risk, the medium risk, and the low risk, respectively. The result could also show the risk index of the risk factor of each aspect. It can help in the pig farm to find the weakness of the biosecurity prevention and control, to improve the prevention and control capacity, and to reduce the risk of epidemic disease. For the broiler farms, we update and improved the risk factor assessment questionnaire. It's containing a total of 32 indexes from 6 aspects, including sites, environmental control, biosecurity, vaccination, nutrition, and epidemic history. There are 3 judgment options of conforming, basically conforming, and non-conforming for each factor. The assessment results are divided into the 3 risk levels also. Based on the assessment model work, the second new progress is the online risk assessment system for intensive pig and broiler farms. As we all know, WeChat apps are very popular and widely used in China. So we developed an online risk assessment system of pig and broiler farms on the platform of WeChat applet. This online assessment system will enable the rapid online assessment of the risk of the introduction, occurrence, and spread of the disease in intensive pig and broiler farms. According to the results, the assessment system will put forward some suggestions on the risk management measures to help farms to improve their bioprevention and control ability and to reduce the risk level. This work is now still in progress. The development of the online risk assessment system is expected to be completed in 2 months. And then we plan to use the online risk assessment system to evaluate more than 40 pig farms and 20 broiler farms in China. And in the future, we hope that the online risk assessment system will be promoted as a common biosecurity management tool for intensive pig and broiler farms to realize the risk self-inspection, early warning, and the improvement of the pig and broiler farms. Okay. That is all for my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for a very clear and interesting presentation. Are there any questions to Yingxi? Jan Vaarten, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. I was wondering, it's a small question. Is this app available only in Chinese or also in English?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear clearly. Can you repeat it?
The question is the app on WeChat available only in Chinese or will you also make it in English? Can it be translated?
Oh, if you have the WeChat apps, you can use the assessment. Yes, it's not only in Chinese.
It is also in English, Yingxi. It's translated
yes,
to English.
The first version maybe only have Chinese, and we can update a new version have the English language.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Nobody? Any questions online, Brigitte, from any of our other Chinese colleagues? No? Okay. Thanks very much, Yingxi. It looks very promising. It's also a very good bridge to this afternoon when we talk about the apps and the products that we get both in China as well as in Europe. Bas Kemp on Work Package 2.
Thank you, Hans. Let's see. So you've all seen this, so pay attention. Thank you. Okay, I will report on the Healthy Livestock project, the resilience part, so the resilience project. And in the resilience project, the idea is that we try to improve resilience of animals against infections. And we do that in 2 ways. One is trying to improve the animals' welfare, and by that way, trying to improve the animals' resistance to diseases. And the other approach is through probiotics, prebiotics, and traditional Chinese medicines. So that's the other approach. But all are aimed at when an animal runs into an infection, it's having an adequate reaction and a minimum loss of function. So that's the basic about the resilience program. And we had 6 approaches, so I'm going to run through 6 slides. The first one is about peri-hatching environment in broilers. And the peri-hatching environment, I think this is, okay, it's an old version, doesn't matter. This is in the peri-hatching environment of broilers is something where we studied the effect of how the animals are kept during incubation and at the end of incubation. And there are 3 systems tested actually. And there were 3 work packages here. And the first one was broiler chicken health and welfare and performance that we would study in a more field kind of approach. And that has been done, and 3 systems were compared, and I think I had them on the slide. Well, I don't have them on the slide now, but anyway, the first one was a traditional hatching system in which the chickens are kept in an incubator, and they are born in the incubator, and after that they're transported to the farm. So that's a hatchery system, classic control system. The second system is a system in which the animals are born in the hatchery, but they're fed in the hatchery. So they were given feed and water in the hatchery at the end of the hatching period before they're transported to the farm. And the third system, which is a system, and that's a system in which the animals are on farm hatched. So what we do is we take the eggs at the end of incubation, bring them to the farm, and the chickens are born at the farm. So that's the third system. And what you could see in the first subtask, and this had been reported before, is that actually the animals that are coming from these 2 systems, which are the new systems, feeding the animals in the hatchery before they're transported or when they're born on the farm, that they give a better body weight development until day 39. They have less foot part lesions. And but on the negative side, and that is because you are increasing growth, what you could see in this study was that there was a bit more wooden breast and white striping as a quality parameter of the animals, which was negatively affected. And we often see that in very fast growing broilers. So what you see in general in studies that we have been doing in this relation, in this kind of setup, is that the systems with hatchery fed chickens and on-farm hatching are normally showing an increased performance. And sometimes you see negative effects in terms of white striping and wooden breast. So that's something I'm going to probably bring also up tomorrow morning, but Roos Molenaar, who's sitting over there, Roos, raise your hand, everybody can see her. Roos is going to give a pitch about this tomorrow morning. Another thing we did, and she's going to say something shortly about that too, that's resilience against pathogens. So here was the test, the vaccine response, to see how the animals respond to a vaccine in terms of their performance. And in this case, we had, again, the 3 treatments: hatchery hatched, conventional system, the hatchery fed, and the on-farm hatched chickens. And we had eggs from a young broiler flock, and they were brought to Wageningen. And at a certain stage, they were given live vaccine response. At day 14, they were given Newcastle disease response. And after that, it was followed by an infection model with the IB, infectious bronchitis. So it's a combination of 2 vaccines to try to bring the animals out of balance. And that was the idea. And in this case, we found, again, in this study, an increased body weight of the animals. So that is something that stands in almost all studies. But we found no differences in mortality and no effect on the Newcastle disease titers, and no things like, no indicators of more damage in animals that were hatchery fed, or there were no difference between the systems. So in terms of this challenge experiment, it seems to be that we are not able to affect their resilience against this disease model. We've done some more studies in disease models, and sometimes you find effects and sometimes not. So it's not very convincing in terms of that. And the only thing that is still convincing is the higher body weight of the animals at day 35. The second part of the second subtask is done by the group of Ilias Kyriazakis, and Ilias is sitting over there with the mouth mask in nice green. Ilias is working at Queen's University in Belfast at the moment, and he had 2 work packages. One was on, in this work package, he did data analysis for a part. And after that, he did an enrichment experiment. The data analysis is a way of analyzing data. I'm not going to talk about that a lot now because it has been reported before. But the general idea is that with, this is an example of what they found, and that's the proportion of pens with straw. If that was increasing on farms, what you could see is that the probability of using critical important antibiotics was reduced. It's that kind of analysis that have been done in that study. The study I would like to report now, what I asked about is the second study, and that's an enrichment experiment. And in this study, they explored the effects of a novel enrichment provision and the time of provision of stress. And they had a standard system. And in the standard system, this is for wiener pigs, the standard system was a plastic toy and a piece of soft wood, which is more or less compulsory by the EU, that you have some kind of enrichment. And the enriched group had an additional provision of fodder beet and newt sacks. And the idea was that this extra enrichment would make the animals, well, better perform or having less problems. And they did something nice in this study. They not only compared it continuously, but they also switched at a certain age. So that was around weaning age. And they switched the groups. So groups that were originally enriched were given the more barren situation, and the other way around. Generally, what you see is that the enriched animals are doing a bit better. The enriched weaners, for instance, in the weaner stage consumed less feed and had an improved feed conversion ratio. And they had a decrease, they tended to have a decreased occurrence of scoring. And also the stress parameters, like they had a higher cortisol. And I'm going to ask to Katarina or to you, Elias, why that is. But in general, it looks like these animals are doing quite positive. And also later on in the finisher state, you see that the combination of enriched and enriched, I'm going through this a bit fast because of time, but what you can see is that the enriched and enriched groups are normally doing very well in this system. They keep on doing the best performance, the best feed conversion, and also less body lesions you can see here. And there are also some indications that the resilience parameters are improved in these animals. Katarina Bukova, who is, yes, she's sitting over there. She's going to give a pitch about this tomorrow also. I think, aren't you, Katarina?
Yes, also today.
Actually, also today. Okay, that's fair. Okay. And regarding this, regarding this increased cortisol after weaning, do you have a suggestion why that could be the case?
Well, we think that it was due to competition for the beet, which I was observing in weaners. It was only at the beginning of the experiment, but we measured these stress biomarkers at the beginning of the experiment. So this is our hypothesis, but there are others. For example, it could be increased excitement or something like this, but I personally think it was due to competition.
Okay, thank you. The third thing is done by Eva Lee and Julia Malchov. She's sitting over there. She's going to give a presentation tomorrow also about this system. But the details here are about the experiment that she has been done. They recently performed, which is an interaction between platforms. They studied elevated platforms a lot in broiler houses to see if that improves the animals' health and performance and the way they use these platforms. So it's for broilers. It's well, that's what they did. They have been spending quite some time on optimizing these platforms to see what would be the best material, to see what would be the best sizes, etc. And but there's a last experiment which is going to report. What we're going to report about now is the interaction between platforms and the hitching system. So in this case, we did a study. She did a study, I should actually say, in which they had 2 hatching environments, which was enriched with elevated platforms or barren with no enrichment. And the hatching systems were normal hatching systems, the conventional hatching system I just reported to, just keeping the animals in a hatch, in an incubator, and they're born in the incubator, and then they are transported to the farm, or on-farm hatching, in which the chickens are born on the farm. And she looked at the usage of the platforms, and a lot of performance parameters like chick quality, mortality, weight, feed conversion ratio, etc., and also quite some behavioral parameters. So it was really studied very intensely. And to cut a very long story short, you don't see big differences actually occurring in things like hatchability, mortality, or body weight at slaughter. And also not in the usage of the platform for animals which are comparable in, or which are conventionally housed or extract housed, as you can see here below. When you look at she also looked at the latency of the animals to move in an open field test. And what you can see is that the extract animals seem to be a bit later in terms of when the moment that they start to move, which might be an indication that these animals are slightly more fearful. But generally, you don't find a lot of differences. The interesting thing about the approach is actually that you, in welfare-friendly systems, it is allowed to, you have to have a reduced stocking density. But when you use elevated platforms, you can go more to a normal stocking density again. So for the application in welfare-friendly systems, it's very interesting to me that you can use these elevated platforms. Am I right, Julia, like this? Okay, thanks. The next subtask was done in China, and this is behavioral freedom of sows. They concentrated on the behavioral freedom of pregnant sows and on lactating sows. Pregnant sows, I've been reporting about that before. They had animals which were tethered, which were kept actually in crates. On the left-hand panel, you can see that, or animals that were kept in groups. This is done by the Cass Institute in China. And what you could see in these, and the interesting thing about this, just to have a very short memory of the findings, is that the animals, the piglets that were born from the mothers that were kept in group housing, showed a quicker going back in terms of ear temperature after a dose of lipopolysaccharides. So it's a sort of induced response, which they restore quicker to normal levels. And you could also see that back in for instance, cortisol levels, which were lower in these animals. So it indicated that these animals, you must mind you, these are sows that are kept in a group housing system, and their babies, their piglets, they're actually positively affected in terms of their response against an LPS lipopolysaccharide challenge. That was interesting stuff. They did a second experiment on behavioral freedom of lactating sows. And what they actually did, so this was on lactating sows, that's the last part they report about. And they just had a welfare farrowing pen and a conventional farrowing pen, and the biggest difference is the size. So what you can see is that the welfare farrowing pen is a bit larger in terms of length and in terms of width. And therefore the captivity range of the sow is a bit bigger. They compared these two systems, and this is a slide showing some of the parameters. This is the C stands for cortisol. So these are cortisol stands, and this is the conventional sow, and this is the welfare crate. So this is the conventional lactating sow crate, and this is the conventional welfare. And what you can see is these are different stages during the lactation period. Day 4, day 16, day 28 of lactation. And the differences appear at day 4, where in the lactation crates in which there is a bit more room for the sow, you can see that the levels of cortisol, for instance, are lower. But afterward, that doesn't continue. It's only during this very first period. Well, then there is another subtask, and the first 4 I reported about now are about, especially about welfare improvements and to see how that works in terms of resilience. And the last 2 subtasks are about chicken gut health. And we have, this is work, what I'm going to report now, is done by Eureka in Poland. She's not here yet. I think she's going to arrive tonight, today at least. She looked at the effect of probiotics and antibiotics on gut health. And the thing I would like to report about is the effect of an IVB challenge, the IBV challenge they did, an infectious bronchitis virus model. And they had 4 groups in that. They had groups that were given, that's a P group here, and they were given a combination of probiotics, antibiotics, and vitamins. So they throw a lot of it at them. And there's one other group, the second group, which was given antibiotics. There is a third group, which is given both probiotics and antibiotics. And there was a control group, which was not treated at all. And they were all subjected to IBV infection. And well, this is what came out of it. Oh, I shortened this substantially yesterday, but so I'm going to make it short anyway. It actually showed that the three groups that were treated were more or less a bit better than the control group. So whether you give the combination of probiotics, antibiotics, and vitamins, or you give the antibiotics or the combination of both, they all seem to give the animals a lower mortality and a better performance in terms of their reaction to the infection. And I'll keep it as short as that, because otherwise it takes too much time to go through this. Okay, so this is more or less the summary of that story. There is a work package on traditional Chinese medicine. I didn't get any reports on that yet, but I assume that that will be in work package 4 by Alain. I'm not sure, Alain, if you got some information from China about it. Yes, I thought so, because he was always doubting whether he had to report it to me or to you, and I was hoping he was reporting it to you. Okay, thank you. Well, then this is it for this presentation.
So just to double check with our Chinese colleagues, there are no additions from Yang Shili on this. Okay, that'll come then later in the next presentation. Very good. Any questions from anybody? Please, Jörg.
Bart, thank you for a very rich presentation. Two questions for my understanding. First, which of these hatchery systems for broilers do you recommend with your experience now? And the second is, are you allowed to add the additional elevated floors to the animal density or not? Or under which conditions? That are, well, two questions burning in practice at the moment.
I understand that, Jörg. I'm always very careful by comparing the two systems. Generally, what you find is that compared to the conventional systems, the two systems which we use, feeding the animals in the hatchery phase and then transport or hatching them at the farm, are doing both actually more or less similar good. So I wouldn't, and anyway, it's industry related. So one industry is going one direction and the other direction. So I'm always very careful to make any propositions on that. But I don't think there are huge differences. And I think it's a matter of how can you control the system. I can imagine myself, if you use a system in which you take the eggs from an incubator to a farm, you have to, of course, be careful that you control the temperature reasonably well in that farm. And so there is an extra issue regarding that. And if you're not able to do that, then probably feeding the animals in the hatchery is the best way to go. But at this moment, it's very difficult to say, okay, this is the best system. Rose is sitting next to you. She did the experiments. Rose, do you have anything to add? Now she's going to say that I'm talking nonsense.
No, I agree as well. But I think it's also dependent on what kind of, if you have an integration or not, or and for example, with on-farm hatching, you're adding days to your production cycle. So I think it's a matter of how does it fit? within the procedures that you have. And yeah, every system has benefits and downsides. So, and I think that's the balance that you need to make. Yeah.
After the first form.
You have to speak in the
With
microphone. Jörg.
on-farm hatching? The question was if you need to distribute the birds. If you do on-farm hatching, no, that's not the case. So you put the eggs in the farm where they also stay for the rest of the production cycle. So yeah.
And the other question was about the elevated platforms and whether you could add the square meters of the elevated platforms, or should you yes or should you no? Well, my gut feeling is, of course, that you're increasing extra space. That's what you do with giving extra elevated platforms, and that has a benefit compared to the square meters of the barn. So the complete square meters of the barn is increased for the bird by adding elevated platforms. And yeah, whether you can calculate that again in welfare standards or not is, I think, a matter of politics. And it seems that in this German system, it's allowed to add these, or you're not adding these square meters to the, well, you can increase the stocking density, isn't it? Now, not the stocking density, but the amount of birds that you keep in total.
No, it is not allowed
No.
to add this additional floor. No, at the moment, at least,
Okay.
according to the German regulation, you are not allowed to add the space of the platform to the density calculation. It's only allowed when you have a separate system. That means you have an elevated platform with a conveyor belt for the feces or so, which is naturally very complicated to do. But I know what the farmers are doing in practice, because controls are only every 10 years.
Yes, this is for Julia, this question. I'm standing here very relaxed.
So we have a special program in Germany, Initiative Tierwohl. There you can add the elevated platform. It's a add area. So, but the elevated platform needs non-perforated surface. So you can litter on it, and then this is an additional space. So you can change the stocking density from 39 kilogram per square meter to 35 kilogram per square meter. But it's very important that the elevated platform has a surface that is non-perforated. So that's a point, yeah.
Thanks, Julia. Maybe a final point on this then, Jan? Or do we have other, oh, sorry.
We're rounding up a discussion.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. A question about the housing of lactating sows. Did sows had the access to the workplace all the time with the welfare pens, or was there like restrained during the farrowing in order to avoid crushed piglets?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was just a bigger crate. So they were not loose housed in this situation, not like the systems we often see that you allow the animals to walk around freely. It was still a crate.
Does anyone from China want to comment on this? No? Okay, are there any other questions from China on the, I see Yang Shuming's name appearing. Do you have a question, Yang Shuming?
Yeah. I just have one question for the for your second, research work, Bas. So you mentioned for the warfare, enrich for the pig. Now you get, the feed consumed where decrease. But anyhow, you get the good for the everything. So I wonder what is the reason. Usually, when we give the animal welfare enrich, now the animal will consume the more feed. Now I just wonder the reason.
Yeah, I think that the animals that were giving the increased welfare standards had a little bit less feed intake, didn't they? I think you're referring to the study done by Katharina and by Elias.
Okay, so later we can.
They were fed at Liverton. They were fed at Liverton. the Shumingyang. So they were fed as much as they could eat, but they eat a bit less when they are kept in the animal-friendly system. It may be just a factor of boredom or something, that they keep on eating instead of playing with toys.
Okay, so okay.
Okay. Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay, one last question then. Then we move on to work package 3.
Thank you. Yeah, we had a discussion about if you are allowed or not to add extra animals to the barn when you have these elevated platforms. But if you would do that, do you then keep the positive effect of the platform? Because otherwise it's just a way of having more space available.
That's a question to Julia, I guess.
Julia, yeah.
I think you can't, you are not allowed to keep more animals in the barn. So because no, there's a restriction, but you can, decrease the stocking density. That's the point. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I think we'll draw it to a close. Thanks, Bas, and everybody who commented. And I'd like to give the word to Elias, who's going to present the basic outcomes of work package 3, which is on early detection.
Morning, everybody. Is this working? Yes, it is. It's very pleasing to see so many new faces, for me at least. Well, at least physically, as opposed to having seen them virtually. So I hope to catch up with them. I'm going to report on the work package 3, both for the European and Chinese work. And I'm very grateful to Long Sen Liu, who provided me with the slides for the Chinese work. I don't know if he's online to answer any questions. Brigitte? Maybe not. So I'll do my best to answer any questions in relation to their work. He's there. Okay, even better. Okay, so just to remind you what were the overall objectives of work package 3, was to develop, validate, and deploy automated behavior and live weight analysis systems that enable the monitoring of early detection of both generic and specific health challenges. And you will see what we mean by that. And in pigs, we used a two-pronged approach. We did that both on individuals, and we did that also in groups, because in some cases you might be interested in treating subgroups of animals. And in broilers, again, was a two-pronged approach. One was in groups, and the other one was using sentinel birds. So within a group, you do not monitor all birds, but you monitor a subset of the birds, and you consider that this to be a representative of what the rest of the group is doing. Okay, so the first part was of what I'm presenting was performed in IFIP in France. They have produced actually a very nice paper for anybody who's interested. I think it came out earlier this year, Anne, or yes, earlier this year. And they were looking at the feeding and drinking behavior of individually identified winners, individually identified because they were having an RFID. What they were looking at was pigs that, because they were monitoring individuals, they were looking at pigs that were developing diarrhea and pigs that were not developing diarrhea. And you can see that there was a high individual variability in both food and water intake for all pigs, I would say. And for the healthy pigs, the weekly feed and water consumption per unit of weight was not different between weight groups. So it was consistent around 4% for the feed and 10% for the drinking water. Now, when they looked at the differences between healthy and diseased, there was no differences in activity, no differences in the daily water consumption between the healthy and sick pigs, sick ones with diarrhea, but there was a significant difference in the feed consumption and pigs that had diarrhea ate less when the diarrhea occurred 20 to 48 hours before, which coincided with 5 to 8 days after weaning, which is normally what you would expect. Now, the colleagues at IFIP suggested that the machine learning methods, because of the size of the observations, fail to detect individually diarrheic animals via feed consumption, perhaps due to the variability. And this is perhaps relevant to why what they were presenting is a little bit different to what we are presenting from our experiment at Queen's. At Queen's, we used 3 different treatments, and the treatments were expected to lead to different degree of risk from diarrhea. Okay, so we used the usual, the zinc oxide treatment, the red one. We used a negative control, which included antibiotic, and then we used a conventional diet that was expected to lead to increased risk because it had high protein and so on and so forth. But this was a means to an end. And you can see here that actually when you're looking at the drinking activity as a group, and this is done with the camera vision, you can see that animals on the control treatment, which have a higher risk from diarrhea, and they are the animals that actually have softer feces, and they are the ones whose diarrheic score is higher. You can see that they have a higher drinking index. So it is a little bit different from IFIP, and the correlation between the drinking score or the drinking index and the diarrheic score was very highly correlated, which is what you would expect. Okay, now we are returning to the IFIP work. This is work in progress, so I really look forward to hear about its outcomes in January, I expect. And this is again the same principle of what they did with the winners. They have a precision feeding room for 96 pigs, a weighing station with the feeders, individual water meters, and in addition to the winners, they have added the microphones because for the finishers, as you know, the focus is on respiratory disease rather than enteric diseases. So the analysis is in progress. And you will see the outcome and conclusion of that at some point in our last meeting. Finally, in what we've done at Queen's, we looked at ear biting. You might be wondering, why did we look at ear biting? That's because in the UK and Ireland, we have seen that ear biting is a problem in 84% of the farms. And actually, when you do not have pigs with intact tails, then the incidence of ear biting increases. And in our farms, it is considered as one of the reasons of using antibiotics because the farmers see the lesions. One of the things that they're concerned is necrotic lesions in the ears, because this can lead to more systemic disease. So what we did, we focused on that particular behavior, and this is basically the flow of what we do. You initially take frames where you know that ear biting occurs, then you train the machine to recognize what is ear biting, and eventually you develop, the machine learns when ear biting occurs. So what you have is something like that. There is a video. How can I operate the video? Okay. So yeah, most of you will be familiar with air biting. You can see that these two pigs are fighting. You will see that actually this is not unique in what happens in this pen. But please note that in the other corner of the pen, there are also, yes, you can see that these pigs are also doing that, but interestingly, in the other pen at the top, that's also what is happening. So it is not a unique phenomenon. So we are able actually now to quantify that, and the next step is effectively to develop an early warning system, because you are able to say that on this particular point of time, you have so many incidents, and then what do you do if you have so many incidents? Just note also that the enrichment in these pens is the standard enrichment that was used on farm. So this is not our experimental conditions. This is what normally you will be used on farm. Okay. Finally, for the pigs, this is a very comprehensive work that was done in China. And in China, they used the existing feeders they had access to, and they enriched it in 4 different ways. They added a thermal infrared camera to monitor body temperature, a conventional camera which was able to monitor body weight. The pigs were, of course, individually identified, and therefore they improved the water and drinking behavior, the monitoring of water and feed intake from these feeders. Most of the input was actually to convert the feeders into recording also water intake. The system is not hugely different from the starting point of IFIP. Okay, so this is now the system. I don't know if you can see the modifications they made in relation to the water system, which is here. And these are the feeders and the monitoring that happens within the feeders, which is fed into a central system. Once the system was developed, they tested it and validated in pig farms in China. Longshen might be able to tell us how pleased the farmers were, because these were commercial farms in China. Just to remind you that they are now able to take simultaneously measurements of body temperature, body weight, water intake, and feed intake. And for them, this is a pig health management platform, because you combine everything, and you should be able to monitor disease and eventually lead to an early warning system in the future. Okay. Now you've heard a little bit about the work that happened in Germany about the elevated platforms in chickens. This is the system that Bas was referring to earlier. So it's an elevated platform with 4 load cells connected to a transmitter box, and continuously logs and transforms the information into weights on the platforms. Okay, so this is effectively a group monitoring activity. The platform has been tested and validated under different conditions. You can see that this varied from the experimental pens to the commercial farm in Germany. Now, the data that you get there is quite interesting. And first of all, the validation is quite important, that you can get the number of animals that use the platforms. So this is an indicator of activity, and you can get the weight on the platforms, okay? And you can see that if you look at the estimated animal numbers against the observed, so this is the automated system, and this is from the videos, you can see that the system works very well. The R is quite high. And the system is able to tell you a variety of things. For example, it can tell you about the circadian course of changes to and from the platform. And as you would expect, the platform is used much more during the day than used during the night. And you can see that the rhythm, the circadian rhythm of the bird changes with time. And you can see that when they were young, on day 13, or day 13, the top, the platform is used more substantially during the day than during the night, whereas when they were older, day 27, it's used more or less similarly between day and night. And you can get a variety of metrics out of these measurements. Now, this doesn't relate so much to the automated detection. It's from the experiment that Bas mentioned before about the 3 different hatchery systems. So conventional hatchery hatching, hatchery hatching and feeding on the hatchery, and then on farm hatching. Now, the idea was actually, that's why I'm reporting it here, the idea was actually that these differences will be tested, these 3 different systems will be monitored with the platforms, but because of the COVID restrictions, this never really happened. So the Dutch team at Wageningen had to change the approach, and you will see what they did. But when you are doing that, it's very similar to what Bas was recording, and they found out that broilers which were hatched on farm were less active, but their activity changed with time, as you would expect, of course. But importantly, the ranking of the 3 feeding systems also changed with time. I don't know what this means, but the people who have done the experiment are here to explain that to us. So then what they did, they replicated this experiment at the Fernel lab in Wageningen, where animals where they were using sentinel animals to record the activity. So the platform was not used. And here you can see that actually the differences are not really pronounced. There were no clear effects on individual activity levels, and actually the ranking was identical for week 2 and 3. So you can see for all 3 systems, actually there is no difference, and any difference occurs during the week 3 of age. So there is a difference with the methodology when you use the methodology to assess activity, and the suggestions or the conclusions were that the hatching system affected the broiler activity at specific ages. There was no doubt about that. The effects found at group level in large groups were not replicated at individual levels at small groups. So when you're using sentinel birds. And the suggestion was that in small groups, individual differences with one treatment might have overshadowed the effects of the hatching systems. But as I said, the colleagues who did the experiment would be here to tell us a little bit more. Okay, and the last work was conducted in China which was the automated detection of broiler weight. And Longshen would be able to tell us why they were interested on individual body weight. And they were using two kinds of cameras. One camera is the Kinect camera, so it has a depth sensor, so it's able to monitor effectively if the bird's 3D dimensions, whereas the other camera is a 2D camera, the RGB camera. So that's basically the difference. Of course, because of the extra channel of the 3D camera, the information you generate is much more, so that creates additional challenges. Very quickly, my understanding is that they focused, for the reasons I mentioned, on the 2D, the RGB, red, green, blue, as it's called, camera. They were measuring a variety of the body of the chicken in the 2 dimensions. So they were treating the chicken as if it was an ellipse, okay? So once you have the ellipse, you effectively reduce the measurements into quite a few dimensions. They found that they were measuring length, width, and height. I'm not very sure how they measured height, given the fact that the cameras were 2D, but there were very high correlations of body weight with both body length and body width, which is quite important because these are the 2 dimensions that specify the ellipsoid. And you can see at the bottom the correlations between the different linear measurements, which are in some instances very, very high. So then the next step, and the Chinese have progressed very well with testing these techniques on farm. They tested the system in the New Hope Yuhe company, which is a very big company, and they have simplified it as a consequence of that. And the user only needs to let the chicken under the device, and the weight of the chicken can be estimated. Clearly, to me, raises questions about its applications, but our Chinese colleagues will answer that. And almost on time for the coffee break, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elias. Are there any questions or additions from Longshen Online, or no, maybe later? Any questions from anybody in the audience? No. Ted, please.
Thank you, Elias, for that detailed and shortened presentation to get us to coffee. Earlier on, you mentioned that there's a lot of variability between pig farms in the measures that were being used, and that variability affected the results for different markers and whether or not there was a statistical finding. Do you think, therefore, that the markers being used for measuring health outcomes on pig farms should be specific to individual management systems?
That's a very good question, because we have contemplated about this quite a lot. What I mentioned, I have to say, is that the variability was within, that was from the IFIP experiment, it was within the specific conditions there, yeah? However, your question is very important because it raises the point that you have variability within the farms. The question is, how do you address that? And when you develop a system, you should always have this in mind. And personally, the way that we will be addressing that, because we haven't done that on a huge number of farms, we have done it only on 3 farms, is that actually we will enable the machine to learn for the specific conditions of the farm. So you are able to do that actually. The question is how long will it take you, of course, because if it takes you too long, it will have no value. But if it takes a couple of 2 or 3 days, which you believe for some of the indicators that will be the case, that will have a value. Because as you say, you might have a farm which has an increased activity per se. Yes, for some reasons you don't know. You might have another farm where the pigs are more sedate, so they don't move as much. So any changes in their activity in the latter case will have an indication that something has gone wrong. But yeah, you're absolutely right. These are our views at the moment of how to solve it, but I would welcome any other suggestions.
Thank you. Anybody else? Nope.
Well, I have a question for Long Sen Yu, because it was quite interesting to me, their methodology for the individual chicken weight, which was very successful. The question was, how do you implement it on farm? Because they had to move the chicken to the system, take the weight, and then leave the chicken. So how would that work in practical circumstances?
Okay, let me answer this question. It's a very interesting and very good question. Actually, in the farm, the farmer don't need to weigh every individual broilers at every day. They just need to random select some of them and to weigh them weight, and use this way to evaluate their nutrition level. But by now, in the farm, usually the farm need to use the electronic weight to weigh the broilers' weight, and give the broilers a lot of stress. And so we develop this method, and this method can contactless and stress-free to evaluate the broilers' weight. And it's very useful, and the farmers give a very high price for this technique.
Okay, so I see, if I understood correctly, in any case, on the farm, they are weighing a subset of the broilers on a specific date to monitor the evolution of the weight. Okay, did I understand that correctly?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Okay. Great, thank you very much.
Okay.
Joan, if I can ask you to elaborate a little bit, in your lovely paper, you mention about the overfeeding and how it might have affected the outcome of what you saw. That, for example, the fact that you did not see some things might have been as a result of the overfeeding. Would you mind elaborating a little bit on that, because the people who are here might not understand necessarily what this means?
Yes, we have trouble with overfitting and machine learning methods because we have not enough sick pigs in our database, and the machine learning learn on the limited number of sick pigs. And when we have new pigs for control the data, the machine learning methods do not know the results with them. It's clear?
Yeah, very clear. Thank you very much. For the people who are not familiar with the machine learning, this was, for example, Joan's problem was our problem with the ear biting as well. Yes, we started with this particular farm, and the machine learned to recognize only one type of biting as the action of biting. But of course, there were many other ways that biting could occur. So what we needed to do was to find very different images of ear biting to train the machine, so to recognize very different instances of biting. And this is very important when you're developing machine learning methodologies. Thank you.
Then the basic enrichment helps.
Yes.
I suppose. In a negative, or this case, a positive sense, but still. Did I see somebody raise their hand? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I just like to add a comment about the variability at individual level. We were very surprised about the huge variability of each pigs considering feeding on the drinking behavior. Even for healthy pigs, the variability was extremely big. And that's why it was also very difficult to detect a diarrheic piglet among this variability, because its own behavior was in fact similar to healthy behavior, to healthy piglets' behavior. So this was the big difficulty. And I think that considering water on feed intake, maybe the pen level or the room level is a better indicator in this case. And for individual indicator, maybe the body temperature could have better results, because there is of course a small variability of body temperature, contrary to water on feed intake. And this could be a better indicator to early detect pathology.
Thank you. Of course, from a scientific perspective, that's why it is a very interesting problem, because it is a very variable period post-weaning. Some people start to consume, some people don't consume, some of them start to consume and then they stop, and so on and so forth. So from a scientific perspective, that's quite an attractive problem, because it's a challenge.
Treatment in the farrowing house, or the ability to feed in the farrowing house, will of course facilitate that a little bit, to standardize or not.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, because I mean, in most of the cases now, I know that farmers provide creep feed in the farrowing house. Whether this reduces the variability or not, I have some doubts.
Okay, thank you, Elias. Anything online, Brigitte? No, no questions online. Then no more questions here. Then I'll propose that we take your advice and we go for a coffee break. Let's go for half an hour and reconvene here at 11:30. And maybe somebody can also put that online so that people know that we get back here in this meeting at 11:30. Thank you all very much. Enjoy your coffee. Okay, if you can all take your seats again, then we will continue with the second part of this morning's session. Before I do, just a short announcement, if you like. During a coffee break, I spoke with a few people, and it seems that COVID and Corona made that some of us don't remember or recognize names anymore. So maybe it's good that we do a quick round so that everybody can say their name and their affiliation. There's also obviously some newcomers who have never been to the consortium meeting. So then it's also good that you state your name. I'll start with Brigitte in a minute. But first, I have another request for you. Brigitte will send a list round where you can put your name down for two things. We have on Friday, we can have lunch here at the hotel after the meeting has closed. So if you have time and if you want to join us for lunch, we need a minimum quorum of something like 10 people, and then we can arrange lunch here. So please indicate if you want to stay for lunch on Friday. Okay. And the second one, Brigitte, is about tonight. And that's, we all go out to a restaurant, and you want to know who is joining us tonight for the evening meal. Both of these meals are at your own expense, so they will be, of course, they're eligible, so you can charge them to the project, but you pay for them yourself, as opposed to tomorrow night's meal, which we pay for to our guests as well from the central project budget. So Brigitte, you'll send a list around. Do you also want to start introducing you? Well, I've named your name now so often, people know who you are, but shall we start that way and then do a quick round who's who? Just your name and your affiliation, please.
I'm Brigitte de Bruin and I work for Wageningen Luisterhoek Research as a researcher.
Paolo Ferrari, the Research Center for Animal Production, CRPA.
Ilias Kyriazakis from Queen's University in Belfast.
Oh, it's me. Jörg Hartung, University of Veterinary Medicine, Hanover.
Roos Molenaar from the Wageningen University.
Hi, I'm Katarina Buchkova and I'm a postdoc at Queen's University, Belfast.
Maria Simidopoulou, I'm from Greece, Greek Poultry Interprofessional Association. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ted Whittam from James Cook University in Australia.
Hi, I'm Luke Dalton from Zoetis, based in Dublin.
Pierre Levallois, PhD student at INRAE, France.
Christine Fourrichon, I am from INRAE and Honoris Vet University in France.
Yvonne Grousselier from France, IFIP.
Andrea Porcelluzzi from Research Center on Animal Production in Reggio Emilia, Italy.
I'm Yael Dotan from the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe.
Jan Vaarten, also from the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe.
Annie Monique from France, from IFIP's Pig and Pork Institute.
Julia Macho from the Friedrich Loeffler Institute from Germany.
Johan Thomas from IFIP, France.
Bas Kemp from Wageningen University.
Kees de Roest, Research Center for Animal Production, Italy.
We missed one late arrival in the corner. Did everybody hear that? Otherwise,
I'm Alain Bousquet-Melou. Yes, from INRAE Toulouse, France.
Okay. Alain, thank you very much. Then Alain will start with work package 4. You will kick off, and then Yang Shili from China will take over, I understand. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah. So I will present the results of WP4 focusing on the targeted use of antimicrobials and the use of alternative solutions. So the organization of the work package in 3 tasks, task 4.1 and 4.2 were dedicated to the description and the optimization of the use of antibiotics in herds in the metaphylactic conditions, on one side in pig herds and on the other side in a poultry flock. And the third task was dedicated to the investigation of new alternatives to antimicrobials in pig and broiler industry. One part of the work was performed in Europe, in Cyprus and Greece for broiler industry, and one work was performed in China in both broiler and pig industry with the use of TCVM, of traditional Chinese veterinary medicine. So for work package 4, the objectives of work package 4 were to describe and predict, first a description, and second try to predict by simulations the individual antibiotic concentration in the animals treated when the drug antibiotics are given in drinking water. So in a collective. So for the description, we obtained 2 types of data in the experiments of the administration of antibiotics and sampling were performed in France for pigs and in Greece for broilers. So at IFIP in France, and by George Kefalas in commercial farms in Greece, so during the experiment we use antibiotics by a metaphylactic way in drinking water, and we sampled the animals in order to evaluate their internal exposure to the antibiotics during the treatment. And in the same time, we perform also a measurement of water consumption by animals. So either at an individual level or at a group level. So at individual level, this was performed, the measurement of profiles of drinking behavior at IFIP, as indicated just before by Ilias, due to identification of animals and RFID identification. We could measure the profile of water consumption by the animals which were treated by the antibiotics. And for broilers, not at individual level, of course, but in Greece and also at in Wageningen University Research, thanks to Ross Molnar, who has done that, we obtain data on the global consumption groups consumption of water. The antibiotics we used previously at the beginning of the study, it was anticipated to test only one antibiotic, but in fact we decided to use 2 antibiotics successively in swine, doxycycline and amoxicillin, which have different pharmacokinetic properties, which we would like to compare, to contrast, and doxycycline in broiler. So after the description of the process, the second step is modeling of the data and able to build a model allowing to make predictions. So predictions. For prediction, we need pharmacokinetic models, which are given by the literature, data from the literature. And we put in the model with the data in the literature, the information of the individual behavior of the animals in terms of consumption of water, the water containing the antibiotics, and what happens in terms of prediction of what we will observe in blood, and try to compare the simulation with the observation in field. I don't develop that much. So for the results, for doxycycline, first in swine, you have the results we obtained. Doxycycline was used as the dose of 10 milligrams per kilogram per day. It was measured in 51 piglets. What we observed, well, doxycycline as a characteristic is an antibiotic with a very long half-life and very stable, either in the animal or in the environment. And these are the concentration we observe in the pigs with high variability, inter-individual variability of the concentration, with low exposure for some pigs, very high exposure for the one. As an example, an MIC90 for the distribution of one classic pathogen in pigs. So you see for some pigs the exposure is not sufficient. So at glance, plasma exposure seems to be probably too low for a global efficacy of the drug, and probably what we call a loading dose, so doubling the daily dose should be a solution for the first days in order to have good concentration earlier during the treatment. But what we observed also was what we measure also, it is the concentration of the antibiotics in the end drinker, in the trough. And we have seen that we have a variation of the concentration of antibiotic in the water compared to the concentration expected here. So compared to what is expected, we have discrepancies between trough in the different rooms and between the day, and sometimes we have between 80% and until 50% of what is expected. So I think there is a concern about this question of the stability and the arrival of the right arrival, the correct arrival of antibiotic in the trough. For swine, we perform also experiment with amoxicillin. Amoxicillin is very short half-life and very unstable in the environment. And the dose, classic dose, the same number of piglets, very large inter-individual variation of concentration, very, very low concentration compared to, for example, some MICs for some bacteria, and also the problem of the loading dose. But I think the main problem for amoxicillin was the measure of the concentration in the trough, in the end drinkers, were very low sometimes compared to what is expected. So I think we have a problem of stability of some antibiotics which are given in water. And finally, I think that a solution, well, I will speak about the solution a little bit later, but there is a concern about these antibiotics and the stability in the end drinkers. And for the results in the broilers, doxycycline, you see that concentration are variable also, but much stable. We begin it at day 1, day 2, so day 1 is not presented, so there is probably an increase during day 1, but an average concentration a little bit stable. We have a plateau here, and I think due to the dose, which is higher than in swine, and to the fact in broiler, doxycycline has a much longer half-life, so less rapid elimination by the animals. These combined characteristics make not so bad situation for birds. So now we are at the step of trying to make modeling and prediction. I will just present results for swine because we are still working and the work is in progress. In the step 1, we use a pharmacokinetic model, classic, with classical PK characteristic of doxycycline, and we simulate the plasma profile, assuming that the drug will arrive with a profile corresponding to the individual drinking behavior you have seen before. But we assume that 100% of the expected concentration of antibiotic is present in the water, which was not the case experimentally. So we make some simulation. You have a quantile 10%, 90%, the average 50%. Is here, and you have a shape of doxy and amox behavior in the body. So we are still going to progress in the simulation, but I think we can detect some different pictures. A picture with a long half-life drug for which we should be able to obtain, if thanks to some adaptation, a good exposure of the animals. But for very short half-life antibiotics, I suspect that with an erratic ingestion of antibiotics with the water, it will not be easy and practically impossible to have correct exposure. This exposure was evaluated. We try to evaluate this exposure by measuring. We use a PK/PD framework, so it's a pharmacological framework. The percentage of pigs which were adequately exposed. So adequately, that means we obtain an exposure that standardized by the MIC, that guarantee that there is a high percentage of the animals that will have an effective treatment. So we make these measurements of adequately exposed animals for as target two bacteria, Actinobacillus pneumoniae and Pastoriella mutocida, for Amox here and Doxy here. And this is the percentage of animal adequately exposed, and the exposure is here on the horizontal line, and the adequate exposure under our critical values, that is indicated here on this arrow. And what we see is that, in fact, at the best, no more than 50% of the animal treated have a correct, adequate exposure. So step 2, we focused on doxycycline, our simulation, our work, because with doxycycline, in fact, we have PK data from the literature. And of course, what the result of the modeling is very dependent of which data we feed the model, particularly the PK model. And specificity for doxycycline and for tetracycline is that we take into account the binding of the antibiotic to plasma proteins, because when antibiotics are bound to plasma proteins, they are not available to be active against bacteria. Only the unbound concentration is active. So we have to take into account the binding. And so binding dramatically impacts simulation. We decided to reevaluate the PK of doxy in winners. So we make a classical PK to evaluate what happens after an IV, after an oral administration. Okay, but more importantly, we reevaluate the data on the binding of doxycycline and to evaluate the unbound fraction, the fraction which is active. In the literature data, old data and less old, it was about 10% of free of unbound concentration. But that means only 10% of the concentration will have an activity. So it's dramatically decrease, in fact, the exposure and what we expect in terms of adequate exposure. So we reevaluate the binding and we estimate around 30% with new data. So that it's about 3-4 times higher in terms of free active concentration compared to what the literature said. So we expect a 3-fold increase in the active concentration. So an important increase in the percentage of pigs adequately exposed. So this is rather good news for the doxycycline. But unfortunately, and it is the last thing we have to do, we make simulation by assuming the adequate concentration of antibiotics in the water, 100% of what is expected. But we identified that it was not 100% in the in-field condition. So we will try to put in the simulation now the observed antibiotic concentration in danger curves, and this will unfortunately go in the other direction and have a negative impact on the percentage of piglets adequately exposed. And we have to do that again still with we'll compare with in-field condition and make the same job with data obtained with broilers. So work is not finished for us. For the task 3, investigation of alternatives, I will present you a summary of the experiment which we have performed by colleagues from Cyprus and Greece. So the objectives were to target application of new alternatives and to target this application to the real need by the farm, taking into account the historical fact-based information obtained from a way to try to tailor, in fact, the solution to the problem by identifying the problem. So the identification of problems, determination of the characteristic of the farm by the BIT methodology. I don't go further on that. And the 10 farms involved in the study were put in 5 groups in which, due to the history of pathology and characteristics of the farms, 5 different solutions were used. And I will just show you